imagine this. Someone operating right at the absolute pinnacle of wealth and political power in a major country.
Yeah.
Someone who knows everyone, has billions at stake, just vanishes. Poof.
No trace, no explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah, deeply unsettling.
It really is. And that's kind of the starting point for our deep dive today.
We're going to explore what it was like to live and, well, operate inside that really unique world. We're drawing heavily from a whole stack of sources, but centered on the book Red Roulette by Desmond Shum.
Right. It's his intensely personal account.
Exactly.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to take Desmond's story and really pull out the most important insights, maybe the surprising moments, and definitely the hard-won lessons.
Yeah, trying to understand the rules of the game. You know, at that nexus of business and political power in China during a time of just explosive growth.
And what happens when those rules suddenly change? Think of this as your shortcut, really, to being genuinely well-informed about the human side of navigating that whole system. So let's just jump right in.
Okay, let's unpack this by going right back to the beginning of Desmond's story. He was born in Shanghai in 1968, but into a family that was really marked by history.
Marked how?
Well, his father's side were landlords before the 1949 revolution, and that automatically put them in one of the 5 black categories.
Okay, the 5 black categories. So that basically labeled them as enemies of the state,
Yeah.
right? Like born rats in the party's eyes.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a label. I mean, it meant real persecution, real hardship for his father's family. And adding to that difficulty was having relatives overseas.
Ah, another liability, something to be suspicious about.
Doubly suspicious, yeah. But interestingly, his mother's side, they also came from a wealthy background, but they managed things differently somehow. They held on to their Shanghai house, even had servants during the Cultural Revolution.
How do they manage that?
It seems her connection to patriotic overseas Chinese, mostly through her father's remittances from Hong Kong, gave them a bit of protection.
Okay. But even with that relative advantage, growing up in that crowded Shanghai house, it wasn't easy for Desmond, was it?
No, not at all. He describes a really difficult relationship with his parents, his father's beatings, his mother's constant harsh criticism, even later in life. It left deep marks.
Wow, that sounds incredibly tough.
Yeah.
How did a kid cope with that kind of environment at home?
It seems like he found his escape and maybe a way to build some self-reliance through reading.
Reading?
Yeah, first comics, but then those martial arts novels, the wuxia. He talks about just getting lost in those stories, you know, identifying with the hero's journey from misery to finding purpose, finding peace.
So building an inner world.
A crucial way, it seems, to battle his own emotional challenges.
Yeah, and alongside reading, there was swimming.
Oh, yeah. And this wasn't just a hobby. It was a serious commitment. 7 days a week, a 40-minute walk to the pool.
I read about breaking ice in the pool during Shanghai winters because they weren't heated.
Exactly. And that anecdote about the coaches pouring hot water just to watch them thrash around, intense doesn't even cover it.
But what did he take away from that, besides cold?
Well, it paints a vivid picture, right? But he talks about learning self-confidence from it, perseverance, and the sheer satisfaction of purposeful effort.
Yeah.
Becoming the top backstroker or second in crawl, it taught him there wasn't just one way to win.
Huh. And that resilience carried over.
Even to trying to hide the welts from his father's beatings in the changing room.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit.
Yeah.
1978, he's 10 years old, and his mother tells him they're going on a short trip to Hong Kong.
Except it wasn't short at all. It was a deliberate emigration.
Right, and they faced that 2-week wait at the Shenzhen border, which was barely anything back then.
Barely developed. And his mother had to engage in this constant, persistent pleading with the border guards just to get permission for them to leave.
Wow, and even after they crossed.
Her persistence just continued. She spent the next 2 years lobbying the authorities back in Shanghai to allow his father to join them. Huge financial sacrifice, apparently, but she made it happen.
So the family's reunited in Hong Kong. But adapting must have been another huge hurdle.
Oh, absolutely. His father, who was this respected high school teacher in Shanghai, suddenly found his credentials weren't recognized.
And the language barrier.
He struggled with the local Cantonese dialect, yeah. Ended up taking this really physically demanding job pushing frozen meat in a cold storage warehouse.
That's a tough transition.
But here's where you see that same perseverance again. His father went to night school, got an MBA, worked incredibly hard, built this reputation for honesty.
And eventually succeeded.
Yeah, became a general manager. Desmond mentions that first ride in his boss's Rolls-Royce, not just luxury, but a real symbol of overcoming massive obstacles through sheer grit.
And his mother.
She showed real talent, too, apparently particularly with her financial instincts in real estate.
Meanwhile, Desmond's learning his own lessons. Feeling poor, walking miles to save bus fare.
Right, learning early what had to be done just to get by. And his school environment in Hong Kong sounds pretty intense, too. A rough place, mostly for police families, where girls would actually fight bullies.
It sounds like a really complex social backdrop.
Definitely. And he became acutely conscious of his height being unusually tall for a Chinese man and people making blunt comments about his appearance.
Ouch. That must have fueled that desire to save face he talks about.
Absolutely, to not be looked down upon. He even mentions seeing a Westerner sticking out on a construction crew and internalizing this fear of being seen as different or, maybe worse, disappointing his parents.
But that didn't stop him from buckling down when he needed to.
No. At Queen's College, he apparently went from slacking off to realizing he had to excel on the exams to stay there. It was like a light bulb moment. He discovered he could really, step on the accelerator when necessary.
That discipline, honed through swimming and academics, did it connect to business early on?
It seems so. That self-discipline combined with an early spark of interest. He'd sit in on these Sunday dim sum brunches with his parents' Shanghai friends.
And overhear them talking.
Yeah, talking about cross-border trade with China as it was just starting to open up. That, plus reading business books, ayapaka, it cemented his ambition to build something, to leave his mark.
Which eventually leads him across the Pacific, to America for university.
Right, University of Wisconsin. He chose it over higher-ranked schools like Cal or UCLA, mostly because it was cheaper. A very practical decision.
And the culture shock.
Oh, yeah? He describes the overwhelming green landscapes after coming from concrete cities, and that funny moment with his swim coach, Jack Pettinger.
The car thing.
Yeah. Desmond respectfully sits in the back seat thinking that's the right place for a senior figure, and the coach is like, "What are you doing back there? Get up front."
Just small cultural differences showing up everywhere.
Totally. He joined the swim team initially, which was a bit of a social lifeline, being the only Asian swimmer among mostly white teammates. But he later quit to focus purely on his double major, finance and accounting.
So he broadened his world beyond swimming.
Yeah, started dating, broadened his social circle, and began developing, let's say, finer tastes. He mentions this memorable, though apparently initially bewildering, 17-course meal at the Everest restaurant in Chicago.
Quite the journey from Shanghai. So from Wisconsin, his path eventually leads back towards China, starting with his first job.
That was with ChinaVest, a venture capital firm focused specifically on China.
What was that like?
He describes it almost like being paid to eavesdrop, learning about all these different industries and strategies just by listening to senior executives pitch their ideas. His job was basically building spreadsheets, writing memos, just soaking it all up.
So valuable early exposure.
Incredibly valuable. And he saw their success firsthand, securing distribution rights in China for big brands like Heineken and Marlboro.
And ChinaVest seemed to understand the importance of, presentation in China.
Oh, absolutely. Desmond was involved in organizing an investor meeting in Beijing back in '94. They pulled out all the stock's red flag limos, putting investors up in the historic Jiaoyutai State guest house.
Where foreign dignitaries stayed.
Exactly. This wasn't just about being hospitable. It was designed for shock and awe.
A deliberate tactic.
Learn from the Chinese masters of creating an impression, he says. The goal. Make China seem incredibly complex, almost inscrutable.
And position ChinaVest as the essential guide.
Precisely. Siren-escorted drives, staying where Nixon stayed. For first-time visitors, it definitely left a mark.
He wasn't just in Beijing, though, right? He was traveling.
A lot. Actively scouting for deals all over China, places like Luoyang, Fujian, Anhui. He was seeing the early, tangible signs of economic change happening outside the big cities.
Like what?
The shift from bicycles to motorcycles, factories scaling up production of things like TV monitors. He even stayed in a police dormitory once in Anhui, a real reminder of how uneven the development was back then.
And his work as an analyst led to a big deal.
Yes, the Asian info deal. He describes the valuation as, frankly, unreasonable, $100 million on just $15 million in revenue at the time.
But growing fast.
Incredibly fast. Warburg Pincus, ChinaVest, and Fidelity Ventures collectively put in $20 million. It was a record for private equity investment in China back then.
And did it pay off?
Oh, handsomely.
Yeah.
When Asian Info had its NASDAQ Q IPO in 2000, the share price jumped significantly. ChinaVest saw something like a 314% gain. On paper, the partners made millions.
Timing is everything, right at the start of China's boom.
And Desmond was positioned right in the middle of it. By age 29, he gets promoted to ChinaVest's Beijing representative.
Coming full circle in a way.
He felt that, yeah. Born in Shanghai, educated abroad, now back on the mainland in a significant role. But despite the success, he also felt unprepared.
Unprepared how?
He describes feeling like an alien, like a foreigner in his own homeland. He struggled with the local social dynamics, the constant obligatory mutai toasts.
Ah, the drinking culture.
Exactly. The pressure to make small talk about politics, the whole custom of passing red envelopes. He felt this disconnect, his global perspective, his knowledge of international brands. It felt foreign compared to the local focus on just practicalities and making extra cash.
Did he just blend in, or?
For a time, he kind of lived in an expat bubble, surrounded by other foreigners, English-speaking Asians, the Chinese who actively sought them out, his social life, office, gym, favorite bar, mostly within this little enclave.
But he wanted something more hands-on.
Seems so. He left ChinaVest seeking a more entrepreneurial experience and joined Palminfo as CEO.
How did that go?
Well, they adopted a really aggressive growth strategy. Hired quickly, opened a California office, tried to project this high-flying international image.
But the reality
Was challenging. High burn rate, low revenue. They couldn't sell to the big state-owned banks, major potential clients. And IP protection.
Always an issue in China back then.
Huge problem. Their proprietary software got pirated by a former employee, and there was basically no effective legal recourse. After 18 months, he realized it just wasn't working, and he felt redundant. He quit.
A setback. Where did he go from there?
Back to Shanghai. His father had actually already returned there and found real success as a megalomybun, an American comprador, growing Tyson's business significantly. For his dad, returning to Shanghai like that was a huge triumph.
And Shanghai itself was changing rapidly.
Booming, transforming. But for Desmond, it was a period of personal defeat after Palminfo. It prompted a lot of self-reflection.
What kind of reflection?
He turned to self-help books, but also dug into Chinese philosophers Confucius, Mencius, and the Buddhist teacher Nanwai Chin. It sounds like a journey of pretty intense self-criticism, trying to figure things out.
It was during this period, while he was still doing some consulting for Palminfo, exploring a potential merger, that he met Whitney Duan.
Exactly. In Beijing. Introduced simply as the Lady Chairman.
Her background was quite different from his, wasn't it?
Very different. Her mother fled an abusive relationship. She went to vocational school for auto mechanics, work that apparently left her hands permanently damaged. But she had this incredible perseverance, even crammed to retake the National College entrance exam later.
And personality-wise?
The contrast. He describes himself as curious. She was much more closed, more guarded. But she was about to introduce him to the absolute core of how China really worked. The system.
Ah, the system.
Yes, Whitney was the one who truly brought him deep inside it. That complex fusion of political and economic power that emanates from the CCP. They learned not just how to survive in it, but how to really thrive.
Even though she'd turned down government jobs before.
Interestingly, yeah, she preferred business, but she understood the power dynamics intimately.
And then came a truly pivotal moment. Whitney meeting Zhang Bailey.
Yes. At the time, she was the wife of Vice Premier Wen Jiabao, who was, on track to become the premier.
How did they even meet?
Apparently at a casual girls' night out. Whitney charmed her, they exchanged numbers, and Whitney was told to call her Auntie Zhang.
Just like that. Call her Auntie.
Just like that. And you have to understand the immense significance of this specific connection. This wasn't just networking. This was gaining access to the family of the future premier of China.
The ultimate asset in that system.
Arguably, yes. The most valuable asset you could possibly possess.
What's fascinating, though, is that Whitney apparently didn't immediately try to cash in on that connection.
Right. She held back. Which maybe shows a strategic understanding of timing or perhaps just discretion within that particular power structure.
But the connection did eventually lead to something huge. combined with another tip.
Yes, that connection, plus a tip from a contact at Costco, whose firm had given Great Ocean, Whitney's company, a loan. It led to a massive opportunity investing in Ping An Insurance.
Ping An. Okay, how much did they put in?
$12 million. Then, in 2004, Ping An lists in Hong Kong. The share price just shot up, valuing their stake at 8 times what they paid, a paper gain of nearly $100 million.
Wow. But paper gains, right. Could they sell?
Ironically, no. China's capital controls legally prevented them from selling. They were forced to hold on.
So during this time, they actually got married.
Yeah, 2005. Registered their marriage in Hong Kong, later held a wedding banquet. And Auntie Zhang was there, effectively acting as Whitney's surrogate mother, cementing that crucial relationship even further.
Okay, so they're holding these Ping An shares. Then what?
Then comes 2007. Ping An lists in Shanghai, and the share price surges again.
How much this time?
Up to 80 times their original investment. Their stake was now worth almost $1 billion on paper.
$1 billion. That's staggering. Did Desmond want to cash out then?
He did. He remembered the '97 Asian financial crisis, the risks. He wanted to sell at maybe a 40x profit, lock in gains, limit the downside.
But Whitney
refused. She hadn't lived through a major market crash like he had. She was confident the price would just keep going up, saw no potential downside.
a fundamental difference in risk perception.
Became a real source of friction between them, yeah.
So how does the book frame this Ping An deal overall?
Almost as a fluke, in a way. Benefiting from the regulations that stopped them selling earlier, it's described as a kind of Chinese variety of influence peddling through an official's wife, but also just how the system worked.
A massive windfall that set them up for whatever came next.
Exactly. It provided the capital for their next major venture, the Beijing Airport Cargo Terminal project.
Right. And that sounds like, right from the start, a bureaucratic nightmare.
Oh, completely. Approvals needed from just a laundry list of government entities.
Like who?
Okay, you needed sign-off from the NDRC, that's the powerful National Development and Reform Commission, the state planning agency, plus the state council, customs, AQ, SIQ, the quality inspection body, and then various local officials in the Shunyi district where the airport is.
And getting those approvals wasn't straightforward.
Not at all. Every single approval required careful, creative framing. You had to show how the project aligned with the CCP's constantly shifting priorities. It just vividly illustrates the pervasive state control, even in supposedly capitalist ventures.
And this is where Guangxi comes in again, right? Those personal connections.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
It wasn't about submitting the perfect application form. It was a painstaking human-to-human process built over time, required genuine personal interest, effort, and, yes,
A significant amount of mutai.
a significant amount of mutai drinking. Managing dozens of these delicate relationships while trying to push a massive construction project forward. It was a monumental task.
The book gives some specific example of navigating this, doesn't it? The corruption.
It really brings it to life.
Yeah.
The example of needing local official Kwang's approval is just perfect. They had to cater entirely to his whims.
Like what? Expensive dinners?
Expensive dishes, flattering his supposed knowledge of poetry, constantly encouraging his ego, discussing fine red wine, all just to get basic plans approved.
It's a clear picture of that soft corruption, massaging egos just to grease the wheels.
Exactly. And Kwang, like many others mentioned, was eventually prosecuted himself for corruption later on. It was a common outcome.
And it wasn't just the top guys. Lower officials could cause trouble too.
That's fascinating, too. Power and the ability to obstruct could leak downwards. Even if a minister supported your project, some lower-level bureaucrat could endlessly stall things by raising seemingly legitimate but minor technical issues.
Wow. Okay. Then things get really dramatic with the airport GM Li Peiing. He vanished.
He was a vital figure for them, a strong guy who got things done, but he also had a gambling problem, reportedly strong-armed staff. Allegations surfaced, and boom, he went incommunicado for months.
This is one of those chilling, real-world examples of unexplained disappearances you hear about in China.
Even to well-connected people. And the bizarre thing was, even while he was missing, Li Peiing technically retained his role as the joint venture chairman.
Which meant
progress was impossible. They couldn't get necessary signatures because they couldn't find him.
So the whole project stalls. How did they save it?
2 breakthroughs, basically. First, that Ping and Shanghai listing finally unlocked the possibility of accessing some of that massive capital.
Okay, money helps. What was the second?
A crucial study tour to the U.S. that Desmond organized for a group of officials.
A study tour? How did that help?
Well, the delegation included the deputy district leader, Li Yusheng. He had a pre-existing heart condition. While they were in L.A., he starts having chest pains, visits UCLA Medical Center.
Okay.
But then a doctor back in Beijing apparently downplays it over the phone. Americans too cautious. So Li Yusheng insists on leaving L.A. to join the group in Las Vegas.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and then dramatically he collapses, required emergency bypass surgery right there at UCLA.
Wow. And Desmond managed this crisis.
He played a critical role, yeah, navigating the U.S. healthcare system for this Chinese delegation. And the officials were apparently just stunned that Li could be discharged and able to travel back to Beijing relatively quickly after such a serious operation.
So this incident, it must have had a huge impact back home.
Profound and immediate. Bringing Li Yusheng back safely made Desmond the benefactor of Shuni, the White Knight. Li himself said Desmond had given him a new engine.
So it changed the dynamic.
Fundamentally, negotiations shifted from being purely transactional, what's in it for me, to genuinely collaborative. Okay, how do we solve this problem together? It just shows the power of saving face and those reciprocal relationships built through crisis in that system.
Incredible story. And at the same time, Whitney was still cultivating ties at the very top.
Absolutely. Deepening connections with really powerful figures like Wang Qishan and Sun Zhenkai.
Wen Jiabao, he was Beijing's mayor then, later vice premier.
Right. She had regular meetings with him, discussing politics, often. Started in his office, eventually moved to the very sensitive party headquarters at Zhongnanhai.
Wow. And Sun Zhenkai.
Another ambitious official climbing the ranks. He'd apparently meet Whitney late at night, sometimes discussing political strategy, how to get ahead, even talking about his rivalry with another official, Hu Chunhua.
It gives you a real window into the tense, ambitious lives of these officials.
And how much they valued Whitney's insights and, importantly, her connections.
So these relationships, plus the capital from Ping An, really fueled their ambitions. They started looking at other big projects.
And Desmond at this point seemed quite optimistic, maybe believing China's entrepreneurs could work within the system to help shape a more open future.
An optimism that was about to be tested, though.
Severely tested.
Their next major project, the Bright Horse River real estate development in Beijing, that started with more excitement.
For Desmond, yes. A sense of excitement, a chance to apply lessons learned, but on a different scale. It was ambitious. Initially, they envisioned the tallest building in Beijing.
But regulations got in the way.
Yeah, constrained by things like sunlight requirements for nearby buildings, but their focus was absolutely on exceptional quality and design. They brought in world-renowned architects, Tadao Ando, Kohn Peterson Fox, an all-star team.
And they decided to include a hotel.
A deliberately limited-size hotel, yeah. Recognizing that state-owned enterprises often built these huge money-losing hotels, they partnered with Bulgari, the luxury brand, to really establish the project's prestige.
I read there were even arguments about who got the top floors.
Yeah. Debates with Bulgari over whether the hotel or the residences would get the absolute top floors. Shows you the premium on location and status. They successfully secured the penthouse for themselves, intending it as their home, complete with an indoor pool.
But working together on something this complex,
Yeah.
it strained their relationship.
It did. The book describes them bickering openly in front of staff. Eventually, they had to split responsibilities on the project just to manage it.
And this period also marked their move towards philanthropy.
Yes. They observed what they saw as a kind of yawning moral vacuum among China's newly rich. Felt a responsibility to use their resources for broader societal benefit.
So they set up foundations.
Established the Tsinghua Kaifeng Family Heritage Center and the Kaifeng Foundation, notably the first private research institute approved by the central government.
And the goals.
Pretty significant on paper. Helping other wealthy families engage in philanthropy, promoting the non-governmental sector, civil society, things like charities, research organizations, HR groups that the party had often suppressed or controlled tightly.
There's an interesting detail about their scholarships at Tsinghua University.
Yes, a debate they had with university officials, particularly the powerful party secretary, Chen Shi. Desmond wanted their scholarships for underprivileged students to cover more than just tuition living costs. Things to address low self-esteem, social awkwardness, really trying to support the whole student.
Going beyond what the university typically did.
Way beyond. And this really underlines Tsinghua's political role under Chen Shi. He saw the university as a key pipeline for the party system, from military tech fields. He led initiatives like the Thousand Talents program to attract global talent back to China.
He even showed them ancient texts.
Yeah, ancient bamboo slip texts from the Warring States period, a gesture signaling, a certain level of trust, shared status within that elite circle.
But around this time, 2008 or so, the political landscape started shifting significantly.
It really did, accelerated by the global financial crisis. The party interpreted that crisis as a total failure of Western capitalism and a validation of its own system's superiority.
Which led to reasserting control.
Exactly, particularly over private business. That massive state stimulus package after the crisis, channeled predominantly through state-owned enterprises, SOEs, massively strengthening their power and market position.
And private entrepreneurs.
Increasingly viewed with suspicion, sometimes even framed as a potential fifth column, the party felt it needed to rein in their growing influence, control their capital.
And they saw this shift directly in their own project.
Oh yeah, in their airport joint venture. After 2008, suddenly they were required to establish a party committee within the JV.
How did that affect things?
It just muddied management decisions. Loyalty within the company started shifting away from the JV's commercial goals towards the directives of the airport authority and ultimately the party.
That must have been deeply disheartening for Desmond.
It was. He genuinely believed China was moving towards separating party and state, that their wealth and efforts could actually contribute to a more open society. The realization that the party viewed even modest steps towards civil society was alarm and was actively tightening control. He describes that as one of the most painful aspects.
Then came the execution of Li Peng, their former airport contact.
Brutal. After his disappearance, he was eventually executed for allegedly embezzling around $15 million.
And the book contrasts his fate with someone else.
Yes, with Chen Tongkai, convicted of embezzling nearly twice that amount, maybe $28 million. But Chen Tongkai got a prison sentence. Why? Because his mother appealed directly to Jiang Zemin, a top leader.
So it highlights that red aristocracy concept.
Starkly. It illustrates what the book calls a mafia-like code within the party. Step out of line, you could pay the ultimate price. But more importantly, it showed how red aristocrats, those with deep party blood connections, got preferential treatment. Prison for them, maybe? A bullet for commoners like Li Peng. A chilling lesson in how things really worked based on bloodlines and power.
So with Li Peng gone, the airport project became even harder.
Phase 1 was finally done in 2010, but they faced a hostile bureaucracy. New GM, high turnover in customs, their old allies retired. Desmond just felt the prospect of endless, exhausting schmoozing just to maintain relationships was unbearable.
So time to exit.
He decided it was. He saw the whole project, despite everything, as a priceless education in the realities of the Chinese system. They started negotiating to sell their stake.
Was there disagreement on how to sell?
Yeah, a conflict with Whitney. She preferred selling to state-owned firms, thinking it would maintain their political influence down the line.
And Desmond.
He wanted the transparency of a commercial deal with an international company. He feared that selling to a state entity could later lead to accusations of theft of state assets if the political winds changed.
Who won that argument?
Desmond, it seems. They ultimately sold their stake in January 2011 to Prologis, an international company.
For a good profit.
Significant profit, yeah. Close to $200 million.
Okay, so after exiting the airport project with a hefty profit, Desmond wanted to diversify overseas.
Yes, he really pushed for it. His reasoning was clear, rooted in the CCP's history of confiscating private wealth. He wanted to compete in the open market, based on merit, not just on connections.
But Whitney resisted that.
Completely. She had immense confidence in her Guangxi network. Her focus was on finding a new party guardian, a powerful patron, to replace the access they'd lost with Wen Jiabao's circle fading.
So a really fundamental difference in their philosophies.
Absolutely. How you succeeded in China. His leaning towards market principles versus her continued deep reliance on the system's connections.
And adding to the strain on their relationship, a very personal discovery about her age.
Yeah, this was apparently a big shock. She had always told him she was born in 1968, the same year as him. But then a fortune teller's booklet revealed her real birth year was 1966.
2 years older. Why hide it?
Apparently due to those patriarchal societal norms about wives needing to be younger than their husbands. But for Desmond, this deception, hidden for so long,
Was a betrayal.
a significant blow, yeah. He felt a profound sense of betrayal. It wasn't just a minor detail, it was fundamental. He describes thinking, I'm still me. And her response, yeah, but not exactly. It severely damaged the trust between them.
This personal conflict, the dissection, the book seems to suggest it reflects the broader nature of the CCP system itself.
It does. It's characterized as a system that almost pits people against each other in a constant rat race. Cooperation isn't really taught or valued in the same way.
It divides the world into temporary enemies and allies.
Encourages that view, yeah. Prepares people, chillingly, to inform on even family and friends if necessary. Winning is paramount. There's this pervasive sense that the end justifies the means. It's described, frankly, as a cold-hearted place where trust is incredibly fragile.
There's an example of the red aristocracy in practice, Wolfgang.
Right, Wolfgang, a pseudonym for a descendant of the party elite. His family's business directly benefited from their lineage government contracts, operating in basically a duopoly with a state firm.
And he played the game.
Absolutely. Despite being westernized, having assets and passports abroad, he fully embodied the system. He even shared company data with the police to secure more business, trust explicitly because of his pedigree.
He's called a reluctant mobster.
Yeah, someone who maybe knew the system was toxic but enabled it because he benefited so much. This is contrasted with Desmond and Whitney, who, the book argues, tried mostly to stay within the bounds of the law, even while leveraging connections.
The system's reach also pulled Desmond into direct political interference in Hong Kong.
Yes. As a member of the Beijing chapter of the CPPCC, that's China's main political advisory body, membership often comes with obligations. He was directed to act as a foot soldier
And what?
in China's escalating campaign to undermine Hong Kong's political autonomy. This intensified especially during the 2014 Umbrella Movement protests.
How did he feel about that?
He describes attending a counter-demonstration march and finding the whole exercise laughable. He felt everyone involved was just acting, participating out of self-interest or fear, not genuine belief that Hong Kong needed less democracy,
What did he personally believe?
that China should not be interfering, that Hong Kong was perfectly capable of managing itself.
Did he try to push back at all?
Remarkably, yes. He wrote a report directly for Xi Jinping's office. In it, he criticized Hong Kong's own plutocrats and crony capitalists for using their connections to the detriment of ordinary people.
And he advocated for
including democratic groups and youth representatives on the committee that selected the chief executive. And he argued against blaming the protests solely on hostile Western forces.
That took some courage, surely.
It did. But it also highlights the deep fear permeating that environment. Desmond reflects on how this fear of repercussions from the CCP, prevented people like him from speaking out publicly against the meddling in Hong Kong.
Selling out the territory's future out of self-interest and fear.
He frames it as a deeply troubling aspect, yeah.
And this winner-take-all nature of the system, it eventually impacts his divorce.
Tragically, yes. The divorce proceedings became bitter. Whitney chose to file in a Beijing court, knowing she could, as he puts it, lean on the judge because of her connections.
China's system lacked joint property laws then.
Right. Basically operated on a winner-take-all basis in divorce. Whoever had more influence often won.
So how did Desmond respond?
He describes deciding to play hardball. He threatened to release damaging information about their business dealings, even leveraging that New York Times story about the Wen family's wealth to force a settlement.
Using the system's own tactics against it.
Exactly. A stark illustration of how the dynamics of power, connections, leverage, how they permeated even the most intimate personal relationships.
There's another example of betrayal around a loan.
Yeah, the situation with Ding Yi, a supposed friend who refused to pay Desmond back a significant loan, even after Desmond had helped free Ding Yi's ex-wife from some trouble, possibly influenced by Ding Yi's new wife, Yvonne, after she felt slighted by Desmond somehow. Just another painful example of personal betrayal within that high-stakes world.
And then, the narrative reaches its most chilling point. Whitney's disappearance.
Yes. In 2017, Whitney Duan disappeared. Vanished from her office in the Bulgari Hotel complex, the very building they had built together,
Just going.
presented as the ultimate arbitrary consequence of operating within that system. As the book notes, unexplained disappearances occur regularly in China. They can target anyone, billionaires, officials, activists, regardless of wealth or connections.
Did Desmond try to find her?
He recounts frantic attempts using every contact he had, only to find nothing, no answers, just silence.
Leaving him to wonder, what if?
Yeah. He reflects on whether somehow if he had stayed in her life, maybe he could have provided some kind of guardrail or a sounding board that might have prevented her fate. A haunting thought.
So looking back at this whole incredible journey, From that difficult childhood, labeled by class, navigating the system through Guangxi, through crisis, building immense wealth, then facing these intense personal conflicts, betrayal, seeing the party tighten in its grip, and finally this chilling disappearance. How does one even begin to cope with all of that?
He talks about a strategy of trying to insulate his emotions, focusing on controlling only what he could control, like learning from that Shang Mountain analogy he uses.
Don't focus on the distant peak.
Right. Just focus on the very next step you need to take, one foot in front of the other.
And he still sees the airport project, despite everything, as valuable.
He repeatedly calls it a priceless education. All the frustrations, the drama. It was the ultimate lesson in truly understanding how the Chinese system operated at its core.
And writing the book itself, Red Roulette, what was the motivation there?
Deeply personal, it seems. Primarily, he says, it was for his son, Ariston. So he would know who his parents really were, understand what they went through.
But also for others.
Yes. For Whitney, who he sees as his silent partner in the book. For his parents. And powerfully, he says, for Hong Kong.
Writing this, speaking out against the CCP system in this way, that takes immense courage.
Absolutely. He mentions specific inspirations, his mentor Keith Berwick from Aspen, Bill Browder and his book Red Notice about fighting corruption in Russia, and Matthew Pottinger, the former U.S. official who recited that powerful classical Chinese poem.
Better to speak out and die than keep silent and live.
That became the book's motto, and he also explicitly acknowledges the bravery of undaunted Hong Kongers.
So the act of writing was more than just telling his story.
Clearly, it feels like a deliberate, courageous act of bearing witness to the system's nature and the immense personal costs involved.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what are the core takeaways listeners can carry with them from this deep dive into Desmond Shum's story?
Well, I think we've seen that operating within China's unique system. It's really less about markets and laws and much more about navigating these incredibly complex, often painstaking personal connections that Guangxi.
Right. Success involves constantly interacting with, and often catering to, arbitrary power and systemic corruption that seems to exist at all levels.
And the political landscape isn't just some backdrop. The party's priorities, its internal power struggles, they directly shape business outcomes. You can't separate them.
And ultimately, the system seems to prioritize winning, self-interest, maybe above all else.
Which fosters this climate of fear, unpredictability, where even those right at the very top can suddenly become incredibly vulnerable.
Understanding these dynamics, not just on paper, but through the visceral experience of someone who lived it, it gives you a crucial, nuanced shortcut to being well-informed about how power, wealth, and personal risk are truly intertwined in modern China.
Exactly. It's beyond the headlines.
Which leaves us with this maybe provocative thought to ponder. Considering the immense personal costs described here, the complex, often fragile relationships required, and the absolute unpredictable nature of the party's control, what does a story like Desmond Shum's truly reveal about the ultimate balance between ambition, wealth, and maybe personal freedom in a society where the system holds that ultimate arbitrary power?